Just this past Saturday, Mark, less than a week ago. Can you believe it? You and I were taken on a journey to a very spooky site outside of Birmingham by our dear friends Sam, Richard, and Jen.
Yeah.
And it's actually a place I've considered discussing on the show before, but hadn't gotten around to it. So it's very cool that we actually got to go and see it.
Was that less than a week ago?
It was, yes. I mean, not when the podcast comes out, but
fucking wild.
Yeah, today it is. Less than a week ago, we were hanging out.
I know it's become like a fucking me thing to say that time is meaningless, but it really is, isn't it? I mean, what is ancient feels recent. This week a lot of people are saying that 20 years ago was actually the year 2000 and not 1980.
What? That's ridiculous.
Yeah, I know.
That can't be real.
Yeah, so that feels way more recent than it was. But there we go. It was a lovely day, wasn't it? A lovely walk, a lovely hike, lovely surroundings.
My body is still recovering
not so much
from wearing a dress and walking through a lot of stinging nettle. There's scabs everywhere, rashes everywhere. It's good time. But it was very pretty. Even if my body is not now.
Scabs everywhere.
Really just painting a really sexy picture for our listeners of my current condition.
Scabby.
So try not to stumble, people at home. Anyways, the place I'm talking about, of course, is the Wychbury Obelisk in Hagley. A very cool obelisk, I might add. And I believe you called it the best obelisk you'd ever seen.
I've had some time to reflect on that, and it's among the best obelisks I've ever seen, right? But it is a belter. It's look, I'm somebody who enjoys, you'll probably know that I'm a droner. I like to fly my drone about. I love the perspective that aerial photography gives one. And a landmark like that, it sticks out so starkly against this pristine, unmarred landscape. It draws your eye, it draws your attention, it draws the mind. What the fuck is it doing there? Who the fuck? That would have taken some effort, some enterprise to build. Nobody just threw that up in a day. You had to really want that thing to be there. But why? Why is it there? It's as much what it represents, the head scratching kind of why than anything else. I loved it. It was great to be there.
Yeah. And I wish that I had looked up for you why it is there, but that's not the point of this story. So I did not do that. And it shall remain a mystery for the time being. But that's a perfect description of it. And really beautiful surroundings, lots of cows. And I believe
lots of cow shit.
You first thing took one for the team, stepped in some cow shit so that the rest
literally
of us
the first step on a really nice pair of Star Wars Adidas trainers up to the fucking heel in cow shit. So there we go.
Yeah. So that happened. We went to this obelisk, and obviously, as you'll see in pictures forthcoming, you can see spray painted on the side of this obelisk the words, "Who put Bella in the Wych Elm?" which is, spooky on its face. But you, Mark, don't actually know much about the story behind that phrase, do you?
I don't. Rich gave me a potted kind of a Cliff's Notes version of it.
Yes.
But no, I am. There are several of these that I know of dotted around Britain, right? Graffiti slogans that people keep coming back to and refreshing.
Yes.
I love community graffiti that just through the passage of time has become a permanent fixture in the surroundings. There's a beautiful example on the drive up to Aberystwyth, my uni town where I laid down semi-permanent roots. There's a rock, and anyone listening to this who knows the area knows exactly to what I refer. There is a rock on the roadside about 2/3 of the drive there that simply says Elvis.
I don't know what I was expecting, but that wasn't it.
It simply says Elvis, and I know right now it's there right now, and it'll be there 50 years from now, and people will be coming back to it and will be spraying the word Elvis over and over and over again on that rock. It is immutable, just like Who Put Bella in the Wych Elm.
Absolutely. And the Who Put Bella in the Wych Elm has been there at least since the 1970s, in reference to a case that goes all the way back to the 1940s.
Nice.
So let me tell you about it, because it's actually very interesting and creepy. This story has everything: a surprise corpse, occult ritual, espionage. It is the full package.
Rubbing my fucking hands together. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Dinner time.
Let's eat. On April 18th, 1943, 4 young boys were out in the forest nearby where this obelisk stands in a place called Hagley Woods. Apparently, a popular activity for little British boys in wartime England was popping up into trees and looking for bird eggs, which is super cute to me. I remember as a child also being fascinated by bird eggs.
My dad has told me about this. My dad has
Really?
told me about doing this in the past. Yeah, climbing up trees and look at the birds' eggs, look at the birds' nests.
But you never did it yourself.
Oh no.
Oh, heavens, that would require going outside.
Think of nothing worse.
Well, this is what our intrepid quartet was doing. They seemed to think it was a very fun time. So as one of these boys took a look into a hollow tree trunk, he let out a scream. And as you can imagine, it was not because he was excited about bird eggs. It was because in that tree trunk, he found a human skull. Now, as kids of that age, for some reason, like to do, they initially made a pact not to tell anyone what they'd found. But also being children, they were freaked the fuck out. And the youngest one was so traumatized, he went home and told his dad what he'd seen. And when the police showed up to check it out, they found the skeletal remains of a body along with remnants of clothing that body had once worn.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, the body was determined to be that of a woman between the ages of 35 and 40 who had given birth before and who appeared to have been asphyxiated, which they determined due to a piece of taffeta that was found pretty far back in her mouth.
Taffeta.
Taffeta, like the frilly stuff that's on like a dress.
Yeah, okay, I'm with you.
That was for some reason in her mouth. She apparently had fairly distinctive teeth, much like our friend, the Lady of the Dunes, and her New York dentistry. Sure. So the police thought that they could get a hit off those and identify her, but no matches in dental records surfaced and no one claimed her. No one reported anyone missing that seemed to meet her description. They combed through all the missing persons files and there was nothing that seemed to match up with this woman that had been found inside of this tree, this witch.
That's captured my imagination. Taffeta in her mouth.
In her mouth, yes.
That's very deliberate, isn't it? That's almost ritualistic.
Yes, exactly. It was about 6 months later that graffiti began to appear around the region reading, "Who put Bella down the Wych Elm?" So now police were like, okay, well, who the fuck is Bella? Is there a Bella missing? Maybe we can figure out who that is, or maybe we can figure out who's doing the graffiti. But they came up empty-handed on both accounts. They could not find a missing Bella, and they could not figure out who was putting the graffiti up, asking about why she was in that Wych Elm. And as you can imagine, a mystery like this caused quite a stir. So, of course, there were going to be whispers and theories about what exactly had happened. The detail of the fact that Bella's arm was found separate from the rest of her body sparked the interest of an anthropology professor by the name of Margaret Murray. And Mark, do you have any thoughts on what Margaret Murray might have concluded based on the findings of a corpse in a tree, its arm seemingly buried elsewhere?
I think Margaret Murray might have come up with some kind of... Did she blame it on an animal?
No, not on an animal. She's an anthropologist.
Yeah, sure. So, body in the tree.
Body in the
tree. Taffeta, all up in its gob.
Yep.
Arm off, buried elsewhere. Witchcraft.
You're on the right track.
Okay.
Basically, she pointed the finger at the occult, specifically a ritual known as the Hand of Glory. Supposedly, this arm was found exactly 13 paces from the tree, which 13. Is a part of this particular ritual that is wrapped up in various folklore that goes, some 400 or 500 years back. And has, this is connected to all the way back even to like old Muslim theology up to strange British occult ideas and mysticism and things like that. And so to her, she looked at this and she was like, listen, this thing is 13 paces away. It's the arm, which usually has something to do with criminality. It's about like taking a criminal's arm off and putting it somewhere.
Okay.
And determined that this probably had something to do with some sort of satanic or witchy ritual.
Is that not that's a common Arabic punishment or for thievery and whatnot, is lopping off the hand,
cutting off the hand. Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's where the roots of this come from, is that as sort of a historical Arabic punishment, and one that you find in a lot of old Muslim texts and things like that, and then somehow ends up being related to all kinds of weird British mysticism and things like that when you get up into the 17th century. So this, of
learned
course,
as fuck you are.
I do what I can with what I got. And so the press, being the same then as it is today, absolutely loved this salacious story. And it also served to connect Bella's murder to another grisly killing nearby of a man named Charles Walton, who was found pinned to the ground by a pitchfork.
Yikes.
That image has been sitting with me all day. All day.
Do we know where he was pierced? Do you mind me asking?
No, I think that's why I'm so like in my brain, I'm kind of imagining like the pitchfork at an angle and him almost like draped over it, like impaled through his middle. But I don't know.
In my head, it's the tines of the fork through the throat, pinning him to the ground.
Yeah, that's a good one too. I'm not entirely sure, because Charles Walton is not like the center of the story. Nobody cares except to connect him to potentially some form of occult practices that might have been happening around this time. And 1950s Britain was in a witchcraft cycle. You know, everybody goes through them from time to time, where they become obsessed with witches and Satan and all that kind of stuff. And that happened to be where people were in that particular moment. So the idea of multiple satanic ritual murders in Worcestershire. How do you say it?
No, you were fine. You were fine. Don't get put off by all of that craziness in the middle. It's just Worcestershire.
Worcestershire.
That's all it is.
That's how we would say it in Massachusetts too, but I assume that couldn't possibly be the case.
That was very, very endearing. If you think too long about it before you start to say it, you'll end up down a rabbit hole. Worcestershire. Nah, just Worcestershire, mate. It's fine.
Worcestershire. Okay. Yes. So multiple satanic ritual murders in Worcestershire was terrifying and exciting to people.
I fucking bet it was.
Yeah, right? People didn't have the internet. Imagine what this would have been.
A little bit of Worcestershire sauce, if you will.
Indeed. But in 1953, another tip came through, one which was just as interesting and much more plausible. A woman who identified herself simply as Anna put forth that she knew who Bella's killers were, and that the woman in the Wych Elm was actually a German spy. According to The Independent, quote, she claimed Bella had been murdered by a German spy ring involving a British officer, a Dutchman, and a music hall artist. The region's many munitions factories had made it a prime target for Nazi intelligence gathering designed to choreograph the Birmingham Blitz. So much more, that's like a thing that absolutely could have happened, that someone was there trying to, gain intelligence or things like that. Although, the connection to a random woman in a tree is, of course, tenuous, right?
Very, very, very tenuous.
Grain of salt, this woman comes in and says this. In 1968, a writer by the name of Donald McCormick claimed that Bella was indeed a spy with the codename Clarabella, who had parachuted into the West Midlands in 1941, but never made radio contact or indeed any kind of contact ever again. He said that he had gotten this information from German military intelligence records and had even asserted that some of the graffiti had in fact used the name Clarabella, not just Bella.
Superb.
But he had no hard evidence. And while the theory gripped Britain, the police weren't exactly having an aha moment about it. They were like, sure, fine, whatever.
Yeah.
I guess, why not? We'll add it to the list of theories that people have come forward with.
I think it's probably one of the only cases where it could have been witches or spies.
Right.
That's
or
broad.
As Donald McCormick sort of put forth, both, because Nazis were really into the occult.
Yeah,
and
they were.
So the idea of her being murdered, being a German spy, and it having a cult ritual to it, absolutely all went together. So really, could be all of these things, right? So the case was sort of officially closed some 40 years later, where it's like, we're never going to be able to figure out what happened here.
Which would have taken us to where? 40 years later?
So like now, essentially, we're talking about the 2000s. But with the official closure of the case came the subsequent release of the case file. And it's now become apparent that Donald McCormick may not have been full of shit. His theory, gleaned, he said, from German records, actually seems to match up with MI5 records that he absolutely would not have had access to in the 1960s.
That's cool.
So if he had, in those files, he would have found records of the arrest and interrogation of Joseph Jacobs, a Nazi spy who had also parachuted into the area in 1941 and was caught and arrested. On his person, at the time of his arrest, was a photograph of a German movie actress and cabaret singer called Clara Bauerle, whom he identified as his lover. Clara was born in Stuttgart in 1906, which would make her 35 years old at the time that the body of Bella was found, right in line with the pathologist's estimate of 35 to 40 years old. She had spent 2 years perfecting her Birmingham accent in the music halls of the West Midlands. And according to Joseph, she was also meant to have parachuted in the spring of 1941. And while we know that Clara Bauerle, whose name does sound like Clarabella and would be a totally normal anglicization of it, was a real actress and singer in Germany of the right age, who'd been in Birmingham the years prior, she was never heard from again after 1941. Not one live performance or movie appearance. She simply disappeared from the records from that point on. So unfortunately, her body was misplaced as police jurisdictions changed with the moving of the county lines decades and decades ago. So while it'd be totally cool and sweet to get DNA in check, we simply do not have it. And old Joseph Jacobs was executed nearly 2 years before her body was found. Interestingly, the last person put to death at the Tower of London. So no one ever got to ask him. So the identity of the body in the Wych Elm, who put her there and who started graffitiing about it, may never be conclusively solved, but there's a good chance she was a fucking Nazi. So good riddance, Bella.
Yeah. Listen, that is such a rich tale, isn't it?
Isn't it?
I mean, echoing through, a 30, 40 year time span. Again, that to me is screaming, why has there not been a dramatization of that tale?
Right.
Yeah. And I'm not, normally my first go-to would be, hey, Netflix. But this screams like a really richly made, expensively produced BBC drama, or
like a mini series of some kind. Like
exactly, episodes in Germany, episodes in the Black Country, Tower of London, the fucking musicals of the Midlands.
Right, there's so much to this, and we know for sure that a good chunk of this happened. The only thing we don't know for sure is whether that is in fact her body, but everything surrounding it is real and did happen, and it seems very likely that that is the case. So
it's a framing device, Episode 1, a couple of clowns talking about it on a podcast. We fade to monochrome,
It's like, the Bill Paxton in Titanic kind of situation.
Exactly.
Call us up, BBC.
Awesome. Yep, hit us up.
Now, Mark, I do have a bit of a mea culpa about last week's episode that I have to bring up here.
Yeah, please do.
Yes.
I don't remember what episode that was. Was that the one where Owen was on?
It was the one Owen was on. You've had quite a week, so there's a lot happening for you.
It's been intense, yeah.
And to that end, congratulations, Alan, on your wedding. By the way,
congrats, bro.
But yes, I had started with the Bella in the Wych Elm story, and my dumbass just didn't read to the end of my notes about it and just left it hanging where it was, with the story of perhaps it being this Nazi spy. And while there being a Nazi spy still hasn't been ruled out, there is one blog on the internet that is dedicated for whatever reason to Joseph Jacobs, that guy who was the last one executed
sure
in the Tower of London, who was in a relationship with Clara Bowerly. And that person spent like a year trying to find a death record for her and apparently managed to find one. So keep in mind, she disappears from everything in 1941, right? Supposedly, she found a death record for her from 1942 in a hospital from some kind of poisoning. I can't remember exactly what it's called. And that is allegedly how she died. Now, of course, other people have brought up, like, you know, maybe that's a false record or things like that. But the other damning thing about it is that apparently Clara Bowerly was also very tall. She was like allegedly 6 feet tall or something like that. And the woman in the Wych Elm was supposed to be 5 feet tall. So this is likely negates the idea that it was this woman, despite all the other stuff that would have said that it would have been her. There are still people who think that the Nazi spy thing and everything is true, and whoever that woman was is related to that, but that it's probably not that specific woman.
The more detail that I discover about this case, the more it lends itself almost to a kind of a dark Tim Burton-esque Edward Gorey kind of, you know, this 6 foot tall, like a kind of a big fish, almost like an anthology series.
Yeah, totally.
You know, wonderful tale. And
yeah, I love everything about it. Like, for me, whether or not it's true, and I said that last time too, I was like, you know, it doesn't really matter if it's true or not. The story itself is so interesting that even if it had nothing to do with the woman in the Wych Elm at the end of it, holy cow, what an incredible, you know, string of things. But I did want to make sure that I clarified that it is likely not Clara Bowerly specifically in that Wych Elm, and the mystery still remains.
Your journalistic integrity remains unbesmirched.
Aside from me literally just not going all the way through my notes, but you know, I couldn't let that hang in the air for people. I don't want to lead anyone astray.